Good evening, my name's Tom Rayo, I'm Chairman of the Public Works Committee. And with that, I'll call the meeting to order on Tuesday, June 7th, 2016 at 6:50 p.m. We're a little late getting rolling here, but because Finance Committee stretched out a little longer. So with that, if we could introduce ourselves, I guess. Go around. Scott Kellogg's been excused, he was sick today, so he's not going to be here.
Steve Gold, Alderman, District 5.
Joe Terry, Director of Public Works. Joe Eichstead, City Engineer.
Todd Ferkey, District 2.
Mayor Zach Ruink. Paul Bauer, Streets.
Jim Morski, Streets.
Okay, and with that, if we could go to item 10, if that's okay with the committee, we'll jump ahead. Jim, you're here for this, and that's to review the city wildfowl population control practices. Canadian geese.
Some of you probably know we've done a few things to try and control the goose population. For 3 years now, we've been oiling eggs in the spring. This year, we weren't very successful. We were a little too late, and most of the eggs hatched. But in prior years, we did pretty well. Somewhere between 60 and 90 eggs were oiled, and going back later, even a year later, the eggs were still intact in the nest. So that was working. 1 year we trapped. We took 65 birds out of 2 locations. And we've done 1 waterfowl fence in Demetz Park last year with pretty good success, although the fence got taken down 5 times during the year. But it did keep the birds out of the park as long as it was up. We have an opportunity to trap again this year, and I would strongly urge you to do it. I think we're probably right at the start of a population explosion. I think everything that hatched this year is probably going to consider this home and will be a resident flock if we don't do something about it. But before you do that, and before we oil, I think the city really seriously needs to think about a feeding ban in the parks. It doesn't pay to trap them or fence them or shag them out of one park when they feed them in the next. And you're just defeating the purpose. And we've done the same thing with a feeding ban on deer in the city, and it was somewhat unpopular at first, but it's been effective. And it's almost the same. We're promoting an urban deer hunt to lower the deer numbers, and we ban the feeding, so it just makes sense. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand. You still have the opportunity to trap geese this year. The best time of the year to do it is the end of June. They lose their flight feathers, so they're very easy to trap. There's no way you'll get them all, but you could significantly put a dent in the population, and I think if you don't, I think in 2 or 3 years your number will probably be triple or more than what we've got now. And they're bad enough now. I mean, they're leaving their waste on the bike trails and in the parks, and they get a little territorial at times and scare people, but the biggest problem is, you know, their waste. They eat 4 pounds of grass a day, and they release 3 pounds. So they're a mess. And I guess my opinion is if you don't want to have the complaints and the bike trail full of manure, basically, you need to start doing something a little more aggressive to control the numbers.
I'd like to also mention, you know, the riverbank, especially, is an area that is part of our park system. We have a crowd that uses that for 4th of July, is, you know, laying out their blankets and such. And there are some places within the city that this time of the year you literally cannot take a step in the grass without stepping in goose feces. So it's also a health risk. I do have a letter that arrived today. I'm going to pass that around. It's fairly lengthy, so I don't know that it's appropriate to read it in full at the meeting today. But it's from a resident that lives along the river. Saw the item on the agenda and wanted to address firsthand, with some fairly strong language, that they're very concerned about the waste, the health effects, the and the fact that in the city the natural predators don't exist, and so a reasonable level of population control is desirable, especially for those that live, anywhere near the river. As far as pursuing the trapping for this year, how have we done that in the past, Jim? As
How
far
did we
as
trap?
no, as far as just the administration. Did we specify an allocation of funds, or did we make a motion to work with the state government on that program? Do you recall?
In the past, we contracted with the USDA to come in and trap, and we didn't specifically have those funds in advance. We ended up charging our time and their fee to the parks budget.
Okay.
USDA, we've got a permit to do trapping or oiling. They're one and the same. If you get a predator or a depredation control permit, you can trap and oil. They just need to know, they wanted to know by June 6th if we were gonna trap. And I let him know that as soon as we'd be able to tell him it'd be June 22nd. That still might work into their schedule because they are trapping in Clark County, and then they're going down to Castle Rock, and on the way he thought they could stop here. A couple of years ago, 3 years ago when we did it, it only took about an hour and a half and they were gone, so. But there's a fee, and it was about $35 a bird or something to that effect. No, it might have been more than that. It might have been more like $60 a bird by the time it was all said and done. They come in with 6 or 7 guys. We help them with a couple of guys, and we trapped them in Demetz Park, right where this resident is talking about, and it was quick and easy. They're out of there by 7:30 in the morning.
So I think one of the first measures would be, to recommend going through this procedure, since we already have a permit for it. Spring came kind of early, and we didn't get a chance to get eggs oiled this spring.
We did oil, but we were late. They were
Yeah.
so close to hatching, it didn't prevent them.
Okay. And
In our budget, there's, somehow we find the money to do.
well, I can sit down with Tim and verify, and Matt through our parks budget to verify that there's sufficient funding available. But really, when you take a look at the hatch this year and the number of goslings with each mama goose, the population really will be intense if we do nothing at this time, and it'll just be that much more challenging in the future to try to maintain a reasonable level of control.
The other thing we can do is when we do our grant application for deer control, we can add this to that application and get 50% funding to pay for the trapping. We've never added that to the urban deer hunt control application, but they're one and the same.
And as far as, I'm in favor of that, but as far as the banning of feeding, ordinance and whatnot, but how do we enforce it to have, can it be done really?
Sure, especially in the public areas. The public parks, it really isn't all that challenging because it's very, it's open for people to see, including staff and the police department. If somebody's doing it on their own property, that may be a bit more of a challenge. I think most people that have to deal with the mess that's left aren't really going to be trying to feed them. This is an issue up and down the river. I know Nakusa's dealing with it in their park system. In Port Edwards, it's a little bit different because the busy park there has a small pond, and so there's some different measures that have been taken quite successfully there. You know, so this is trying to maintain a healthy population in an area where generally those predators aren't going to exist. Becomes a task for us to endeavor.
Well, I know they're a problem, have been, over the years, and it's just, I think we have to, I guess, regroup and step up again and do more than we have been able to do here lately, so I think it's,
Like I say, you're never gonna get them all because we don't have access to all the private property along the river. We do the islands in the river, and we do the park shorelines, and, you know, even when you get around Bulls Creek, there's some pretty wooded areas back there where you'd never find them all anyway, and they are having trouble with them on Quinnell's Creek up on First Street North. The neighbors were begging me to do something up there last year, so we walked it and tried to oil nests. We didn't find any nests, but they just keep chasing geese from one yard to the next. And I told them I'd keep them in mind if we ever do trap again. But the other question you might have is what happens to the geese that get trapped? They go down to a poultry processing plant in Waupun, and once they process the meat, they test it to make sure it's safe to eat, and if it is, you can get it back, or they'll donate it to a food pantry that they work with. So,
and I know last year, I think it was, or the year before, I had a couple calls myself from Quinnell's Creek that you mentioned up there, so.
mhm.
I guess I would, what do you wanna do this here?
Well, I think for the time being, it'd be appropriate for the committee to make a motion to allow city staff to work with the USDA to implement a goose roundup program on an as-needed basis for the 2016 calendar year.
I'll move to that effect.
Second.
Any further discussion?
And I guess as far as the feeding ban, that can be taken up at a different committee, or
We'll work on that.
Okay, committee, you and me, Steve, here tonight. All in favor, respond by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, ayes have it. Let's see.
Thanks,
Jim,
Jim.
you here for another one yet, or?
I don't think so. I think Paul is and Joe are gonna handle the rest. Yeah, so I think that'll be it for me.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for hanging around.
Yeah, no problem.
Number 10.
Back up to number one then. And that's to review the DPW monthly report. Joe?
Activities are listed in the report for the departments under the director's authority. Couple things, I guess, to note. One is on the third page under other DPW activity. There's a highway safety improvement program, and the engineering staff has met with the DOT on a number of connecting highway issues, which will be discussed with a different agenda item at this meeting this evening. But there is a possibility for a significant accident reduction project for an estimated $300,000 at little to no cost to the city. Estimated that the city share would be about $5,000, and that would be partnered with the Village of Port Edward, so it'd be about $2,500 each because Seneca Road's a boundary road between the communities. I think time is of the essence on this because if you've seen the DOT, any of the news lately, the DOT budget's been capped and there's a chance of project delays and such. This particular safety area was identified by the state, really I think as a result of conversations that city engineering staff had with the state 3 months ago.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how they determined it, if it was other DOT staff members that travel that way locally that had going forward.
We had identified several potential areas that may be of concern on 8th Street, and I think the DOT did a little further investigation, and this was one intersection that popped up on their system as having a sufficient number of accidents that the DOT felt that it would take action. The only, like I say, the only responsibility locally is a part of the design share. So I don't have it on as an agenda item, so I'm not looking for a motion, but I just wanted to bring it up that I have reached out to the Village of Port Edwards. I'll put together a memorandum of understanding based on the current joint road agreement there, and try to pull together any documentation that we would need to and bring it back next month for review. If there aren't any other questions on the report, I'll submit this to be published on the city website and can be viewed by anybody.
I just have a question, and Mayor, that you're here, and Joe, whoever, and it has to do with the airport. And maybe my memory's short, which it is at times, but it has to do with the airport, and had met with Sand Valley GM and design team, expected traffic and their needs, and then identify and plan for procurement of aircraft ground support equipment. I guess what that all getting into?
I participated in a meeting with the GM, but design team, I'm not sure who he's referring to on that. We had a preliminary meeting following a presentation at Rotary that talked about their project down in Sand Valley, but I'm not certain what the design team meeting, if that was a second meeting that happened. I didn't know there was gonna be a meeting, if there was one, so I will find out Thursday at our commission meeting. As far as the it's GPU, ground power unit, is kind of the acronym for that last one. We have sometimes aircraft that come in that need ground power support. So what essentially it does is they can shut off the engines, but still have accessory power to the planes. And so there's some options available he's looking into, maybe in some refurbished or used from other airports. And so that was what that was for.
Okay.
It's not cheap, but we've had some requests for it, and there's always a risk of losing traffic because of not having that. And it's kind of a part of a bigger plan to acquire like de-icing and some other services that other airports offer that we don't. So really nothing specific, to my knowledge, has been proposed. I think we're gonna have another update at the commission meeting, but those would be the two, I guess, responses that I can offer.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It just that's, as I was reading over this, stuck out, jumped at me there for
Yeah.
whatever reason. I just thought that I would ask about that, and with the development going on down there with Sand Valley, I guess, to me, I guess, how much are they looking at the city to provide?
Fortunately, it's been minimal to none, only because they're not quite sure exactly timing of traffic and things, so I think they're doing, I think, the right thing in terms of keeping everyone in the loop. But, and Todd took a tour down there a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
Did they have any references to airport stuff?
No.
There seems some interesting question about them joining, and so I think there's a closed session on, I know there's a closed session on Thursday about membership, and other municipalities being encouraged or invited to join, Rome being one, Buren being the other. So, I think a lot of it, from my standpoint, the city standpoint, I think the Sand Valley project presents a good opportunity for more members to join, and the same to carry a bigger share of the burden, collectively.
Absolutely, and I think that's part of why, what jumped out at me, these couple items there, is that those that may benefit from what we have with the airport is that they're asked to step up to the plate.
Right. Yep, fully agree.
And participate, so.
Yep.
There's one other item under wastewater. The spring land application of biosolids has been completed, was completed in May. I think an important thing to note, and this has been something that I've been working on for the last, 6 months now, is the Class A sludge permit that the city should have. And to my knowledge and the knowledge of the superintendent, wastewater superintendent, the city has done everything necessary, basically 5 years ago, in order to acquire that permit. The city has spent in depreciation of equipment and actual expenses well over $1 million in that 5 years, dealing with waste sludge that the city could otherwise be using or selling because of this. So I've reached out to several members of the DNR fairly regularly, and I included Kathy Stepp in a notice again today, and we may end up trying to maybe ask some of our elected state officials to actually draft legislation if the DNR continues to delay this. Really, for the last 2 months, we haven't had any response back from our inquiries, just asking for a date. We've been informed that everything's been submitted. We just don't have a date, which is troublesome.
Thank you, and I know this has gone on for a long time, being sitting on the wastewater commission and that, hearing time and time again that we've done everything, but we're not getting anywhere with this. It's costing us money by not getting the Class A, so. Okay, let's see. Item 2, review the proposed recycling implementation and education plan.
So in your packet, there's a single stream automated recycling implementation plan. It reviews what we're proposing moving forward with. The purchase of the truck has been specified in order. We do have an expected delivery date in December of 2016. The purchase of the carts, I anticipate actually placing the order for carts on or about August 15th, with a standard size cart being 96 gallons. We want to make sure that residents would be allowed a one-time option to select a 48-gallon cart at no charge by calling the street department at 421-8218 between now and August 1st. Street department staff will then totalize the special requests and we will then be ordering the carts. For public outreach, I have drafted a frequently asked questions. That's also included in the packet. And I'm proposing to send that by direct mail to residents along with a card that could be filled out if they wish to change from a standard 96 to a smaller 48. There will be a cost associated with that of postage. We'd probably be looking at about $3,100 in order to do a direct mailing to all of our residents. I'd propose news release to be drafted with the assistance of our River Cities Community Access staff that would be sent out to the newspaper, social media, television, and the city website, and also for RCCA to assist in producing some video clips, some educational clips. One of the reasons why, or the primary reason why I would recommend the 96-gallon cart is because eventually the city will also be replacing its regular refuse collection trucks, and that will likely also be an automated process, and at that time there'll be some additional limitations put on the cart, where if you would, what I would be proposing is that if there are a certain amount, basically a 66-gallon cart is what would be collected. If a resident would want more collection than that, there would be a fee associated with it. In most municipalities, they found it very effective. One 66-gallon cart seems to suit folks very well, because a lot of the things that go in that cart are recyclable, and so the recycling volumes tend to increase. So, really want to emphasize the 96-gallon cart is the recommended one, but we do want to make an offering, especially to some of the folks that just don't need those kind of volumes. During implementation, residents would be directed to contact the street department if they have questions relating to the automated single stream collection, as they do now, if there are questions regarding that. The recycling contract, the staff is in the process of preparing a request for proposals for single stream unloading site. We'll review that next month, and with an intent that the contract to be awarded at least prior to the beginning of our new single stream automated. Cart delivery is anticipated to be then in late November, directly to residents' homes as part of the cart purchase agreement that was approved last month. City employee will assist to verify the locations have received a cart and the placement of the cart, and we anticipate an implementation date of January 1 of 2017.
Thank you, and I guess for those watching us tonight or as on tape that we will be over the next few days, but people who want to see the carts can come down to City Hall here and they're in the lobby, so.
Right, and they are full of
look at it.
recyclables, so you can tip them and move them around and get a feel for them.
To some, I think it's somewhat scary of how big when you hear 96 gallons, but on the other hand, if, a 32-gallon ordinary garbage can, I guess, would be, it's three times, but really not.
Right,
and it's on wheels.
And I think if people have concerns, if they could stop down to the City Hall lobby and try it out, I think you'll find that in general, that the 96-gallon cart's actually better balanced, just because it's closer to your, the handle's closer to either your waist or slightly higher, where when you tip the smaller 48-gallon one, you've got to lean over a little bit. And I think they'll find that it's, really pretty easy to maneuver, and it's full. It's, completely full.
Thank you. Anybody else on that? I guess item 3, review the intersection control evaluation and recommend intersection options for the East Grand Avenue and Lincoln East Jackson Street intersection.
So the staff, we discussed this last month, looking at the various options. The process here is for the city to offer advice for this project. It's being funded largely in part by the DOT, and so staff has reviewed the various options, the pros and cons, the safety, the costs, the aesthetics, and of the 3 options, the one that's shown on the screen right now is a signalized intersection, which would be similar to what the intersection is today. Versus a stop-controlled intersection. It's a little smaller and versus the roundabout intersection. And unless there are a significant number of questions, the recommendation by staff is for the stop-controlled intersection. The aesthetics really, I think, help maintain the quaint atmosphere that we currently have downtown. It offers a level of service that's reasonable. Safety aspects are good, and it handles the volume of traffic that is predicted for the next 20 years. With that, I would recommend that we consider at least conduit for a signalized intersection. The signalized intersection requires a larger footprint, so if that ever is needed, there would be some cost to expand the intersection, but it wouldn't have to be replaced entirely. Seeing that these streets tend to have to last 50 to 60 years rather than 20, it's a little difficult to predict what's going to happen long-term. The roundabout obviously would handle a much larger volume of traffic over time, but because of some of the complications of the grade, the property needing to be acquired, and actually the cost estimated to maintain the intersection with the additional lighting, I was surprised to see those cost estimates were actually higher than a signalized intersection in this particular instance. Also because of the other issue is the school crossings. It tends to push the crosswalks further away from the intersection, which can make it more challenging for a single crossing guard to maintain the entire intersection if one is ever placed there and is doing that work. So,
Thanks for bringing that up about the crossing guard. That was one of my notes which I didn't look at, but I had a couple calls about that on that intersection, so.
Related to the desire to have one there, crossing guard, or after reconstruction?
After reconstruction, but
Okay.
how it would,
if there
Or
ever
what we
was
did-
one.
Well, the reason why I asked is the last time we met, Kurt, it's Colleen Dickman and myself on crossing guard committee, just,
Mhm.
say, a couple of weeks, I mean, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago. We removed it at that intersection
Okay.
because the volume was the lowest, we needed to move them
Okay.
around. So I'm just curious to know
No,
what the,
sure.
I haven't heard any feedback negatively about it, I'm assuming it was the right decision to do that, but I just wondering if.
no,
there's
they were just wondering what we were gonna end up with and what their opinions were on it, and.
The stop control.
And if we needed a crossing guard of how it could be done with,
Okay.
with what we decided.
Sure.
on, so.
The stop-controlled intersection, because traffic is required to stop, makes it a little more suitable without a crossing guard. And the intersection itself is more compact, and so the distance that the pedestrians have to travel to safely cross is also reduced. So, so that's what staff is recommending, and we look for council approval on that recommendation. Once we receive that, we can offer that feedback back to the state. And if there were to be any significant concerns by the state in that recommendation, we would obviously come back to the committee and council. But all three options were identified as practical and suitable options, so, I think the city can essentially get what it wants here.
A time frame on this, and dollar-wise and whatnot, what can we, what are we looking at, really, with the state
So this,
not having the money or cutting back on funding and that type of stuff, so.
sure, this project is slated for 2019 construction as part of the East Grand Corridor project from the bridge to 8th Street. So it's actually quite early in the process yet, and so a big part of kind of nailing down somewhat what the preference is for the intersection control type basically just helps to define the scope moving forward, so that, public information meetings and that sort of thing, that it's what the city's preference is that's being.
We're still looking at
pushed forward.
2019.
Yeah, it's still
Okay.
2019, and the proposed cost that they had for this particular intersection ranged from the very low end, $360,000 for an all-way stop, all the way up to the high end for the roundabout at $840,000.
Well, I'd move that we proceed with the four-way stop at the Lincoln, East Jackson and Grand Avenue intersection there.
Would you want the conduit on that?
And with the conduit underneath, yeah.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion by anybody? Not, committee will vote. All those in favor respond by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, ayes have it. Let's see. Item 4. Review the railroad quiet zone crossing upgrades, costs, and regulations. Another one that we've had on, I think, for many years.
So the last time that the committee discussed this item, it was determined that kind of dig a little bit deeper into the quiet zone application process and see if, see what other roadblocks there might be in that process. And since that time, the things that we have looked into basically kind of kept going back to financial dollar amounts for actual implementation. You know, what sort of equipment's actually needed out there at the crossings to implement a quiet zone, and what are their costs. I did reach out to Canadian National. I spoke with the Public Works manager, or a Public Operations manager, I think was the title, from their Stevens Point office. And she validated the costs, and she was going to look into very specific intersection equipment needs or at each crossing. And so, unfortunately, I wasn't able to have that information for the meeting tonight, but the values that were presented there in the packet, you know, upwards of $700,000 for crossing improvements in order to implement the quiet zone, is fairly accurate from their vantage point. And the jurisdiction really lies with the Federal Railroad Administration and the operating rail company, which would be Canadian National. So Canadian National would be installing the equipment and setting the pricing, you know, for any upgrades that are necessary. And so I wanted to bring that back and to the committee, that the $700,000 that's for the west side quiet zone is really with the financial commitment that would be needed or close to in order to implement the quiet zone.
That's total cost for all the crossings, Joe, on the west
Yeah,
side?
there's a couple private crossings in there, in that stretch, that, you know, I'm not sure how those would factor into the determination, but all the public crossings were included in that.
Well, I know it's been an issue in the area for a long time, of what we can do and can't do, and I think it always comes back to the dollars of, I guess, what do we want to do? You know, is it advantageous to us to, you know, look at $700,000 to do that? Obviously, there's a lot of people on the west side, and the whole city, on both sides, actually, but as far as railroad crossings, with the horns and whatnot, personally, to myself, it doesn't matter, but there are people who don't like it, so. Mayor?
Question about the limited period of time, and maybe you covered it. What restrictions or what modifications need to be made if we want to do the limited window?
Shorter duration, like a
Yeah.
12-hour quiet zone?
Yeah.
Interestingly, there really is no, from a safety standpoint, that's really so the understanding is that if you don't blow the train horn, you need to compensate for not blowing the train horn. And so the same requirements essentially apply for a 12-hour or 24.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah. And so.
Just the way I read it, it seemed like there was kind of a leeway to
Sure.
do it without modifications or
Yeah.
major modifications.
And so lights and gates at every crossing. And then, well, that's really what adds to the financial end of things is the lights and gates. Not all of ours have that. I think they all have gates or lights, but not all of them have gates.
So this is mostly, I guess, for us to look at tonight and talk about or whatever, but,
Right, we'd like to try to
or how to
figure out
proceed.
what the priorities of the council are for this. Obviously, it's a lot of money, and if the city would wish to do that, it would have a significant effect on the budget and projects. But, I think you have information now that's fairly accurate, and, I think in the next 2 months, if you get a chance to talk to your constituents, we can bring it back on the agenda for further discussion and a formal recommendation, if that's reasonable.
It's fine with me, 'cause the budget will be coming up.
Right.
With this alternative quiet zones, where they can use train-activated stationary horns as a substitute for train horns. Is there any municipality close that has something like that? Where that seems to be directed just at the highways or just at the
Right.
roadway, rather than the neighborhood?
We did check into that, because it's something that we noticed and thought, oh, well, maybe this wayside horn is a possible solution
Mhm.
that could be, somewhat cost-effective, and,
Right.
they're still blowing the horn, and maybe we can get by with a less expensive alternative. The answer that I received was that was one of the early approaches, ways of going about a potential alternative quiet zone, or alternative to. And apparently Chicago had used, I believe it was Chicago, they had used them quite a bit, and the effectiveness, they weren't very effective. Although the noise is directed down the roadway at the vehicles, as far as actually being effective at keeping the safety present and stuff, they've since phased them out. There may still be some, although I don't know that there's any in the state. Chicago was a primary example user of them.
Mhm, mhm. Any cost factors on them at all?
I didn't have any costs on those.
I guess my intent was to get a quiet zone, and having a horn directed at the roadway rather than a neighborhood, again, would maybe give a little bit, everybody a slice of the pie here as far as what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, if there was a cost factor that was relatively cheap, where it's, say, less than $10,000 to install 12 horns, that might be a better bang for the buck to at least try something like that, rather than $750,000. Or would you say, yeah, $750,000, yeah, so.
Yeah, the conversation that I had with Canadian National was that Chicago had used them quite a bit, and they were pulling them all out. And I wish I had my notes on that, what the reasoning was for
Mhm.
that. But I don't have that
Okay.
handy.
Yes, sir.
Similar kind of thought that I had related to the whole zone. So you're able to limit the section of track you're wanting to designate, and therefore those are the crossings you need to have the improvements done, correct?
Mhm.
So the other thought that had been kind of bouncing around, and this goes back to Dave Glassbrook's conversation at the time that I worked with him, that maybe Fremont Street, it's a Fremont Street, there's a couple of at least one crossing, it's a public crossing today, that there's talk about maybe eliminating it
Mhm.
or making it private, I don't know, private, what the options are, but to me, it's like if you can almost bite off, $750,000, we have a lot of uses we could stick for $750,000
Sure.
bucks to get the bang, but if there's a couple of crossings where it makes the most sense, Chase Street, West Grand, and then, you know, up in that switching yard somewhere up in there, you know, there's more industrial up there, but,
Yeah.
you know.
So the minimum cross or quiet zone length is a half a mile. And about 6 years ago, when we went through it at that time, we looked at the half-mile section from Chase Street up to High Street. So we had 3 crossings, and there was some median improvements we had to put in so that vehicles couldn't sneak around through the gates in order to get the safety brought back up to compensate for the loss of the train horn. And it was maybe $45,000–$50,000 worth of improvements to get a half a mile quiet zone. And that was the cheapest section of crossings in order to actually qualify. And at that time, it was turned down by the committee, council. The city didn't approve it at that time, primarily under the basis that, well, if they're not blowing their horn at either of these 3 crossings, they're going to blow it, you know, a few hundred yards down the track at the next crossing. A couple caveats with their process is that every year the national safety average is reviewed. And so that's the number that our safety measures need to be above. And so if they review, if that national average increases and our safety drops below that, it's kind of a uphill battle. You know, one year you might have the quiet zone, the next year you might not. So there's not really a guarantee that if the money's invested, that the city's always going to have it. In addition, the train engineer can, based upon their operation of the train, can blow the horn at any crossing or at any time. So even with a quiet zone, it's at their discretion, you know, for safety reasons or whatnot.
Sure.
So just a couple caveats there that it's a tough proposition to.
Well, I'm sure if they, you know, if they see a cow on the tracks or whatever, they're gonna blow the horn whenever they want. Again, getting back to these alternative horns, what I'm interested in is to quiet the presence of a train at 3 in the morning coming through the residential neighborhoods. And if this would do that and do it at a relatively inexpensive option, I think it's maybe something that we should take a look at. You know, if you could come up with some numbers on what that would cost.
We probably have to see what they spec since they don't exist in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And if Illinois is pulling them out, they may not have a current standard. But we can look into it.
I guess if there's something you guys can come up with and, you know, come back in a couple months to the council, or committee hearing and the council, going into budget time.
I just hate to-
Where we can find money in that, but, so.
I just hate to see it dropped because of sticker shock, you know, the whole idea of trying to help people sleep at night, so. Okay.
It's been on the table here for a number of years,
Right.
off and on, so. Let's see, that's, item 5, review status on truck route signing project.
Okay, quick update here.
All right.
So one of the GPS providers that we had submitted changes to have made the updates with Baker Street not being a truck route. In addition to that, the letters to RCH truck drivers seem to be effective from what we could tell. A couple of the confusing truck signs that were out there on Spring Street, we've had in the interim time period here, had them removed. And probably the most informational item here is the signage cost. So of the kind of the pilot route along Spring Street and First Street North, the costs that we've gotten for just basically the sign materials is about $1,500. And so kind of the next steps that we're taking right now are just reviewing compliance with the proposed signage with the manual uniform traffic control devices to make sure that everything's in compliance, color and sizing and that sort of thing, prior to installation.
What do you need from the committee? Anything right now, or?
Nope.
Okay.
No, just
We're good.
yep, just a update.
Okay. Thank you. Item 6, review of condition of connecting highways. Joe, which one? Go ahead.
We met with the DOT.
Yep.
It was an informative meeting. There was a couple things that we hoped to have gotten, but they're in process yet. And so the information that we did receive from them is kind of an overview of how they review state highways, how they classify them and rank them, and they develop curves for different sorts of pavements over the course of that pavement's lifespan. And the first document in the packet that you have, it's shown on the screen as well, that's the scoring that each section of connecting highway in the city has scored. And it's a scale of from 0 to 100, 100 being a brand new pavement. And so the lowest score on this in the city is on A Street South, south of Riverview Expressway, with a score of 62. Kind of where that falls in their typical pavement life cycle is it's shown on the TV there, that you start out at 100, and that at a point around 80, 75, 80, the pavement condition drops off fairly rapidly. And so kind of the long and short of it is that once you get down to like a 30 or 40, that's when the DOT starts to look at a recondition or some sort of major improvement. The first part of the lifespan, 80 down to 100 down to 80, you can do periodic, less expensive maintenance. When you're in that steep decline of pavement condition, there isn't a lot of maybe some general patching and that sort of thing, but their recommendation at that point is keep it drivable, let it deteriorate, because the money you stick into it isn't cost effective until it gets to a point around a score of 30 or 40, and then you can recondition the pavement and get it back up to something that's, again, serviceable. The good news with that conversation was our plan that this year, our concrete maintenance, pavement maintenance that we're doing is on Highway 1334 north of West Grand up to the northern city limits. And that's currently scored in 82, which is still within that window of time where the pavement's serviceable. And so majority of the money that we have budgeted this year is being put into that section of roadway where it's going to be most effective. But the downside is the sections of roadway that are already in their 60s, and the current age of those roadways, essentially their recommendation is to let the condition continue to deteriorate until it reaches a point where it's cost effective to do a more major improvement.
So the challenge that we've had over the last several years, obviously, is the amount of money that we budget for patching is a significant amount. And we're unable to keep up. We're unable to maintain the roads to the condition that we feel the community is used to and expects. And when we've met with the DOT on finite plans, or at least as predictable as possible for especially the reconstruction of 8th Street, there really aren't any answers. So the challenge for staff is to try to determine what's a reasonable level of funding and where do we spend that funding, so that that dollar's bringing the best value to the community. So that's really the reason behind this particular effort. Fortunately, like Joe said, we're spending the money in the right place, but some of these locations, it's pretty difficult, as someone who's responsible for maintaining the roads and take some of the phone calls, to say, well, the lifespan of this road has reached a point where we really do need to let it go, and eventually we can throw an overlay on it. It doesn't pay to do it now. 4 or 5 years, you can do an overlay and get another maybe 15 years out of it. But until then, it's going to continue to deteriorate. That's kind of a tough message to have to send to folks. But with finite funding levels and transportation, connecting highway money that isn't increasing, we really don't have a whole lot of choice other than pull from our local projects in order to maintain these.
And we've certainly experienced it over the last few years working on the Riverview Expressway and having to go back in there every other year, even the very next year, that everything you fixed, the section next to it fails, and it doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere.
And that probably led to my, I think, putting this, or bringing this up, a few years back as 8th Street, And so I appreciate the info, I appreciate the numbers that we're given here. We have, I think, like a lot of, if not all communities across the country, have a lot of aging infrastructure and how to take care of these things. 8th Street doesn't surprise me with 62. I wouldn't have any idea how they give that score, come up with that, but you also look at the expressway bridge over there in that area, 65. Going down the court there in 54, 69, that we have aging infrastructure here. And I guess the question that I had thought of when you were talking, Joe, is that to overlay it, in 5 years or whatever, to get another 15 out of it, what's under there? What's under is that how deteriorating is that? To overlay it, is that beneficial?
Well, I think we've got some issues with some underground infrastructure. We've had some water main breaks on 8th Street South. It's going to be a challenge to come up with a real solid recommendation and stand up on the soapbox and feel really confident with it. So we'll continue to evaluate that and bring back the best recommendations that we can.
I appreciate that, and come back with info whenever you have it to this committee, who's ever on it. That's 8th Street is not quite as old as me, but it's approaching there. It's going on 50 years. So it's a little short of me, but I remember walking down it when there was only 2 lanes and no curb. So, thank you. Anybody else with anything on?
Well, I was gonna say with the numbers that you got up on these, again, what's underneath the roads has gotta be factored in too.
Sure.
Certainly. So.
Yeah, and just to add on to that point, there's some other issues out there. There's, like with a couple of the intersections, and then also also access control on that. You know, I mean, there's a driveway every 100 feet or so,
Yeah.
with a center left turn lane, you know, which creates some operational issues. So on top of infrastructure, there's some operating issues as well. But
With these highways, do we get much participation as far as state money for improvements and rebuilding? Or when they're a designated state highway, or it's not all just on the city, is it?
I believe what we're spending just on concrete pavement maintenance is using up the entire road aids for those. So the road aids are supposed to, you know, it's by mileage of road. That's how they calculate how much, and it's supposed to cover the maintenance and snow plowing, salting, and you know, all of those sorts of things.
Okay. Item 7, review the street age and conditions map.
So in preparation of putting together a capital improvement plan for the next several years, I wanted to start with some metrics. So this is just kind of some information. I haven't had an opportunity to really crank a bunch of numbers out yet. The map that you have in your packet, kind of the colorful street map, it says 2015 street survey on it. What we've done here is the colors of blue, green, yellow, orange, and red are conditions on a surface rating of a 10 scale are 5 or less. And these roads are 50 years old or older. Clearly, these ones are streets that are going to need attention for certain within the next 10 years. So there's a lot of the city that's in that situation. The purple colors, the slightly finer lines, those are streets that are 40 years and older. So very soon we'll have to really be dealing with those as well. I think if you take a little time and go and drive some of these streets, especially the streets that are 40 years and older, you can really start to see where the engineering and the construction style had changed. Where these streets are showing a little bit better surface, although the asphalt is starting to deteriorate. You're not getting the subgrade failures and you know, a lot of the alligator cracking. So some of these roads or streets will be much better suited to a mill or pulverize and overlay, which is much less expensive than complete reconstruction. 25 to 30% of the cost of complete reconstruction. So, you know, I think we've got some good things going for us there. But when you take a look at the streets that are aged, and then you combine that with some of the infrastructure concerns, and we'll go through the sanitary sewer one in a minute here, we really have a pretty daunting task to try to sustain our streets and infrastructure. So this is really for your information, just to kind of paint a picture of it. And like I said, next month I'll have some numbers to substantiate maybe where I think we should be in an ideal situation, where we are, and then hopefully some strategies to try to move forward. So unless there's questions with that, I'll jump right into the sanitary sewer.
Go right ahead.
I've done this exercise. It's a little bit easier with sanitary sewer, at least using the methodology that I used. We'll be able to go through some of these, and we're fairly, the wastewater utilities being fairly aggressive right now on televising. There's been some new software purchased to aid in that and link that information right with the city's GIS system. So evaluations of areas that are high priority will be much easier to do. What this map shows is the red areas are sanitary sewer pipes that are clay and that are 50 years old and older. And by my estimation, most of these will need, about 80% of these will need replacing in the next 30 years. So again, you can see that there's a pretty good portion of the community that we're going to have some infrastructure issues with in the next 30 years. So again, budgeting and planning and really coordinating is going to be very important. I also have some, and I don't have that in the video presentation here, but I do have some maps that the water utility has shared that indicates areas where breaks have been prevalent and areas where the utility feels that there are some high priorities there. Obviously, when we're looking at streets that need maybe a mill and overlay and partial reconstruction, if it's reasonable to delay that infrastructure replacement, that's good for everybody. In areas where the street needs replacing, it'd be in everybody's best interest to replace everything at the same time. Obviously, with various utilities and budgets and sometimes politics, it's challenging, but fortunately with the GIS system, it's very helpful in trying to determine, at least somewhat narrow down what our needs are. So, so these have been identified. The wastewater utilities in the process of televising these and really setting priorities accordingly.
I think that's important, I think, as we go forward, have a plan of attack, I guess, of where,
Right.
where we're starting at and where we want to get to and how to get there.
And I think as importantly is what would we need to do as a city to be sustainable and have that as a goal.
Some more good information. Let's see. Item 9, review and set, is that where I'm at? Item 9, I think. Review and set 2016 public hearing rates.
Yes.
So the document, it's very consistent to previous years as far as, you know, what the look and feel, the items that are there are all the same as previous years. We do show a % change from last year. And then also the current rates for this year, which the majority of them are based on our contracts that were approved last month. And then for any public hearings that are held, the rates are inflated 20% to make sure that, you know, if the project is delayed for a couple of years after the public hearing, that those, any cost increases are covered. And we only charge the actual expense, but that just, it's a conservative value. Sanitary sewer and water main are based on new construction only, and we didn't install any new construction in 2015, any new extensions. So those remain the same. But if there's any specific questions, I can certainly address those.
I don't have any, I guess. I'd move that we set the 2016 rates at what we have here in front of us.
Second.
Any further discussion by anybody? Hearing none, committee will vote. All those in favor respond by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, ayes have it. Okay, so we did. Referral list, I guess.
Unfortunately, I neglected to include the referral list. I think that's become an unfortunate pattern for
Or
me.
whatever. I thought maybe I missed it, but that's.
But unless we have any new referrals, I think we can sit down and go through the referral list and,
Yeah.
and make some adjustments accordingly, and we'll include that in the minutes, and I'll email that out so that if there's any questions, we can get those addressed before the council meeting, if that sounds
Okay.
appropriate.
Thank you. With that, we're to item 12. I'll move that we adjourn.
Second.
Nobody's opposed, all in favor, respond by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, ayes have it. The meeting's adjourned at 8:01 PM.